Hello everyone, it's Pastor Scott Martz with Living Faith Lutheran in Midlothian, Texas. If you're like me, you know more about the coronavirus than you ever wish to know, and it's very troubling. Things are getting very serious. Currently, just the exponential growth of the virus across the world, but our country is number one in the amount of cases and the amount of deaths, and the numbers are just increasing. And I know that many of you are worried. Now, one of the things that's missing, in my opinion, on social media is just the spiritual side of things in this current crisis. So I've decided on our Living Faith YouTube channel to start a new playlist, and it's called Our Current Crisis, A Pastor's Perspective. And I want to talk about from the start something very difficult to talk about, and that is this current crisis an act of God? Now, back on March 19th at a press corps meeting, President Trump made mention that some were calling this an act of God, but he disagreed.
Democrats and Republicans, and there's a lot of goodwill going on. This was something that happened that was, some people would say, an act of God. I don't view it as an act of God. I would view it as something that just surprised the whole world.
So is this something that just surprised the whole world, or could this be an act of God? So if we go to BibleGateway.com and type in the word virus in the search bar, 0 references. There isn't a word in the Bible that's translated, at least in the NIV, as virus. Likewise, pandemic, epidemic, you're just not going to find it. However, if you type in the word plague, it is used. It's used 109 times. Now, in looking at these references, almost all of them are acts of God. Now, a plague, in looking at how the Bible describes a plague, many times it could not be a virus. You know, a plague of locusts or gnats, things like that. It's obviously not a virus. However, there are several places where God sends a plague and people die or people get very sick. And some are reserved for the end days. It's interesting to me that in the Middle Ages, there was something that the people of its day called the Black Plague. They definitely used that word to describe what we know was a virus outbreak. And it was quite severe. If you consider the entire world population at that time was 500 million, and between 155 and 200 million died worldwide. In Europe alone, between 50 and 70 million people died. 1 in 3 people caught the virus, and the mortality rate was between 30 and 90%. Okay, at this point, you're probably thinking that I'm thinking that the current crisis has to be an act of God. Not necessarily. We need a point of comparison. So act of God versus what? Well, there are 2 other possibilities I can think of. It could be an act of man, or it could be an act of nature. Let me explain. Now, experts say that the virus started in Wuhan, China, which really is an amazingly beautiful city. I've never been there, but just looking at it. But this city, again, the source of it, and what many are saying is speculation, of course, but that the city has a dark side with the wet markets where all kinds of animals, exotic animals, perhaps even diseased animals are slaughtered live and sold in the wet marketplace. And there's a theory that the market is very close to a biological laboratory. Could it be that one of the workers there sold an animal that was being biologically tested to the wet market, and that's how it all started? If that's the case, again, it's only a theory that's out there, then that would not be an act of God. That would be an act of man. It could simply be an act of nature. So they claim that the virus originated with bats and maybe an anteater or something, that somehow it contaminated the anteater, and then it crossed over from an anteater to a man. And since humans have not had this virus before, we don't have any explanations against it, and that's why it's spreading so rapidly. But if that's the case, again, it would be an act of nature and not necessarily an act of God. Take, for instance, Steve Irwin. So Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, and we know that he had a tragic death, and he was swimming and filming a very large stingray. And the way God made the stingray is that it has a sting to its tail. And Steve swam too close to it, and it stung him several times. And one of the times it pierced, went through 2 ribs and pierced his heart, and he died tragically. But this would be an accident and an act of nature, because that's the way God made a stingray. So applying it to the coronavirus, so just say that there was a person who, bought an anteater at the marketplace, and the anteater had a virus and it crossed over to a human being. That would, in a sense, be an act of nature, not necessarily an act of God. Now, if you made it this far in this video, you might be wondering, Pastor Scott, what do you think? Is our current crisis, this COVID-19 outbreak, is it an act of God, an act of man, or an accident? And the answer is, I don't know. But I do know the one who does, and that is God. God knows all things. He knows, again, if it's his act, an accident, or an act of man. I think there's some better questions, though, to ask, and one is why? Okay, Lord, you allowed it to happen. Why? What are you trying to teach us in this? In this new playlist, I hope to answer some of those questions. Another question is what? What is it that you want your church to do? What ways are you going to use this to advance your kingdom? And ask those questions. Again, I'll include those in this playlist. And a third question is how? The Bible says we can do all things through him who gives us strength. How are we to do this? Now, just a preview of upcoming videos. I know from my study of church history that some of the best hymns were written in times of crisis. So we're going to talk about creativity in times of crisis. Now, if you got any value at all from this video, please hit like. We're trying to grow our YouTube channel here at Living Faith. Also, if you are local to Midlothian, Texas, we're trying to plant a church here. When all this craziness dies down, I'd love to meet you in person, but we certainly can have a dialogue without meeting face to face. So please leave a comment below, and I will tell you how to get a hold of us. Also, please subscribe to this channel, and I look forward to seeing you in upcoming videos. May God bless you, even in this time of crisis.
I can be still, I can let go, I can find peace in taking it slow. You know my path, it's under control.